I thought Chloe Bennet never cared about anyone, but I was wrong about the one person who changed everything. I remember the first time I saw Chloe walk into my bookstore, because some moments have a way of staying with you even when you wish they would not. My name is Emily Parker, and for the past few years, my life had become simple by design. I opened my small bookstore every morning at 8, made coffee before unlocking the front door, organized old novels on wooden shelves, and spent my days surrounded by stories that belonged to everyone except me. After my divorce, I convinced myself that a quiet life was the safest life. I did not need unexpected conversations. I did not need new connections. I did not need anyone making promises they might not keep. Then Chloe Bennet appeared. She walked through the door on a rainy Tuesday afternoon wearing a dark green jacket, carrying a camera bag over her shoulder, and looking around my bookstore as if she was searching for something she had lost years ago. She was younger than me, confident, and strangely difficult to understand. Most customers smiled when they entered. Chloe simply nodded. Most people asked questions. Chloe observed everything quietly. "Can I help you find something?" I asked. She looked at me for a moment before answering. "I hope so." There was something about the way she said it that made me curious. Not because she sounded mysterious, but because she sounded like someone carrying a story she was not ready to tell. She explained that she was looking for an old photography book that belonged to her grandmother. I searched through my records and found a copy stored in the back room. When I handed it to her, she held the book carefully, almost like it was something fragile.
"Thank you," she said.
That was it. 2 simple words. But for some reason I noticed them. Maybe because Chloe did not say much. Maybe because every small gesture from her felt more meaningful than it should have. Over the next few weeks, she returned to my bookstore several times. At first, I thought she only came because of the books. Then I started noticing small things. She remembered how I liked my coffee.
She
noticed when I rearranged the shelves. She asked about paintings hanging on the walls and actually listened to my answers. But whenever I tried to get closer, Chloe seemed to step back. It confused me. She was kind without admitting she was kind. She cared without ever saying she cared. And that was the part one could not understand. I had spent years learning how to recognize disappointment, but Chloe was teaching me something different. She was making me question whether I had been wrong about people all along. I did not know it then, but the woman I believed had the coldest heart would become the person who helped me open mine again. And the strangest part was that Chloe did not even realize she was doing it. After Chloe started coming into my bookstore regularly, I began noticing something I had not expected. The woman I once thought was distant was actually someone who paid attention to everything around her. She was not the type of person who filled a room with conversation, but somehow she always noticed the details that others missed. One morning, I found a small coffee sitting beside my register before I even opened the store. There was no note, no explanation, just my usual order waiting for me. When Chloe arrived later that afternoon, I looked at her and asked, "Was that you?" She looked surprised.
"What?"
I smiled. "The coffee." She looked away for a second and shrugged. "You always forget to take care of yourself when you are busy." It was such a simple sentence, but it stayed with me. Chloe said it like it was nothing. Like remembering small things about someone was not a big deal. But to me, it was. I had spent years around people who knew my routines, but never truly noticed me. Chloe was different. The strange part was that she never seemed to realize how much her actions revealed about her. She would help me move heavy boxes of books, fix small things around the store, and recommend books she thought I would enjoy. But whenever I thanked her, she acted like it was completely normal. "You do not have to thank me," she would say. "It is just a bookshop."
But I knew it was more than that.
The bookstore had become a place where two very different people slowly started understanding each other. One afternoon, while organizing a collection of old novels, Chloe asked me why I kept so many damaged books instead of replacing them. I looked at the worn covers and smiled. Because every book has a story. The marks, the faded pages, the imperfections. They show that someone cared enough to keep it. Chloe became quiet after hearing that. For a moment, I thought I had said something wrong. Then she looked at me and said, "That is a beautiful way to see things." I laughed softly. Most people just see old books. Chloe smiled. Most people do not look closely enough. That was the first time I wondered if Chloe was not cold at all. Maybe she was simply someone who felt deeply but did not know how to show it. Over the next few weeks, we started talking more. Not just about books, but about life. Chloe told me about her photography work and the places she had visited. She described forests, small towns, and quiet moments she captured through her camera. I found myself enjoying the way she saw the world. Everything became a story when Chloe described it, but there was still something she kept hidden. Whenever conversations became personal, she changed the subject. Whenever I asked about her family or her past, she gave short answers. It made me curious, but I did not want to push. I understood what it felt like to protect parts of yourself. Maybe that was the reason I noticed her silence. Maybe that was the reason I wanted to understand her. Because somewhere beneath Chloe's quiet personality was a person who cared more than she wanted anyone to know. The more time I spent with Chloe, the more I realized I had misunderstood her from the beginning. I thought she was someone who did not care because she rarely expressed her feelings. But the truth was much more complicated. Chloe cared in quiet ways. She cared through actions instead of words. She cared through the small moments that most people would never notice. One afternoon, a customer came into my bookstore looking for a rare edition of a classic novel. I searched everywhere, but could not find it. Chloe happened to be there, sitting near the window with her camera beside her. Without saying much, she walked over and started helping me look through the shelves. After almost an hour, we found the book hidden behind a stack of older collections. I smiled and thanked her. "You did not have to stay and help me." Chloe shrugged. "I wanted to." Those 3 words stayed in my mind longer than they should have. Because Chloe did not say things like that often. Every time she showed kindness, she seemed surprised that anyone noticed. That made me wonder what had happened in her life to make her hide the parts of herself that were clearly warm and caring. A few days later, Chloe invited me to see a photography exhibit where some of her work was being displayed. I almost said no. Going to events alone had become something I avoided after my divorce. I had become comfortable with my small routines and my quiet bookstore. But Chloe looked at me and said, "I think you would enjoy it." For some reason, I believed her. The exhibit was beautiful. Chloe's photographs captured ordinary moments in a way that made them feel extraordinary. A small cabin surrounded by trees. A family laughing outside a local market. A quiet road covered in autumn leaves. Looking at her work helped me understand her better. Chloe did not ignore the world. She noticed everything. She simply had a different way of showing it. After the exhibit, we walked through the city while talking about the photographs. I asked her why she chose to capture moments that most people would overlook. She smiled and said, "Because sometimes the things people ignore are the things that matter the most." I thought about that answer for a long time. It felt like Chloe was not only talking about photography. Maybe she understood what it felt like to be overlooked. Maybe she knew what it was like to have people misunderstand her. That evening, we sat outside a small cafe and talked longer than we planned. Chloe told me she had always found it easier to communicate through images than conversations. "Pictures do not ask you to explain yourself," she said. "They just let people see what is already there." I looked at her and realized something important. Chloe was not someone without emotions. She was someone who had learned to keep them hidden. And somehow, without trying, she was teaching me that people were not always what they appeared to be. The woman I once thought never cared was slowly becoming the person I trusted the most. The weeks that followed changed something between Chloe and me. I could not point to one specific moment when it happened. There was no dramatic event, no single conversation that suddenly made everything different. It happened slowly, through small interactions that became more meaningful with every passing day. Chloe became part of my routine without either of us planning it. She would stop by the bookstore after finishing a photography project, and we would spend hours talking about everything from old novels to the places she wanted to visit someday. I started learning the small details about her, just as she had learned the small details about me. I noticed that Chloe always looked at the world as if there was a hidden story waiting to be discovered. One evening, while we were closing the bookstore, I found her standing near a shelf filled with old family albums and forgotten photographs. "What are you looking for?" I asked. Chloe smiled softly. "I do not know yet." I laughed. That sounds exactly like something a photographer would say. She looked at the photographs carefully. "Sometimes you find things when you are not searching for them." Her words made me think about how unexpectedly she had entered my life. Before Chloe, I believed I knew exactly what my future would look like. A quiet bookstore,
Familiar fases.
predictable days. But now, I found myself looking forward to conversations that lasted longer than expected and moments that had no plan. One Saturday morning, Chloe asked if I wanted to help her organize some photographs for a personal project. I agreed, and we spent the afternoon at her small studio. I was surprised by how different it felt from my bookstore. My world was filled with written stories. Hers was filled with visual memories. But somehow, they were connected. We both collected pieces of life that other people often overlooked. While reviewing her photographs, I noticed one image of an empty park bench surrounded by trees. "Why did you take this picture?" I asked. Chloe looked at the image for a long moment. Because someone had been there before. Even if they were gone, the place still carried their presence. I looked at her and wondered if she was talking about more than a photograph. Chloe had a way of revealing pieces of herself without directly saying what she felt. That afternoon, she finally shared a little more about her past. She told me that after losing someone important in her life, she became afraid of becoming too attached to people. She believed distance was easier than disappointment. I listened quietly because I understood that feeling more than I wanted to admit. "I used to think protecting yourself meant avoiding pain," I said. Chloe looked at me. "And now?" I smiled slightly. "Now I think it also means missing out on the good things." For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was a quiet understanding between us. Not a promise. Not something we needed to define. Just the feeling that we both recognized something important was happening. When Chloe left that evening, I stood outside the bookstore and watched her walk away. I realized the woman I once thought was impossible to understand was actually someone who felt deeply. She just carried her emotions differently. And somehow, I had become someone she was willing to let closer. The more I learned about Chloe, the more I understood that people are rarely as simple as they first appear. When I first met her, I thought she was distant because she did not care. I thought her silence meant she was uninterested. But over time, I started seeing the truth hidden behind all those quiet moments. Chloe cared more than anyone I had met in years. She just expressed it differently. One rainy afternoon, I arrived at my bookstore earlier than usual and found a small package waiting near the front door. Inside was an old bookmark made from a pressed flower and a handwritten note from Chloe. The message was simple. She had found it at a local market and thought I would appreciate the craftsmanship. I held that little bookmark in my hand for several minutes because it represented something I had forgotten. Someone had thought about me when I was not there. Someone had noticed what made me smile. Later that day, Chloe came into the bookstore and I showed her the bookmark. "You remembered that I like things with history," I said. She smiled. "You remember everything about books. I thought someone should remember something about you." Her words stayed with me because that was Chloe. She never made grand speeches. She never tried to impress people. She simply paid attention. As the weeks passed, our connection grew stronger. Chloe started helping me prepare a special collection of books featuring stories about journeys and new beginnings. She said the theme reminded her of me. I laughed when she told me that because I did not think I was someone who started over. I thought I was someone who simply continued. Chloe looked at me seriously. "There is a difference between continuing and moving forward." That sentence made me quiet. I realized I had spent years carrying my past like it was something I could never put down. Chloe was the first person who made me consider that maybe my past was not something holding me back. Maybe it was something that helped shape who I became. One evening, we sat outside the bookstore after closing. The street was peaceful, and the warm glow from the store windows made the moment feel almost unreal. Chloe asked me why I never talked about my own dreams. I smiled. I am too old for new dreams. She immediately shook her head. No, you're just too used to putting yourself last. I wanted to disagree, but I knew she was right. For years, I had taken care of responsibilities, other people's expectations, and everything that needed to be done. I had forgotten what it felt like to wonder what I wanted. Chloe made me feel seen in a way I had not experienced for a long time. Not because she fixed my problems. Not because she had all the answers. But because she reminded me that I was still a person with hopes, fears, and possibilities. That night, when Chloe left, I stood in the doorway watching her disappear down the street. I realized something that surprised me. I was no longer wondering whether Chloe
Cared.
I was starting to wonder if I was brave enough to admit how much I cared about her. The days after I admitted to myself that I cared about Chloe felt different, even though nothing between us had officially changed. I still opened the bookstore every morning. I still arranged shelves, helped customers find stories, and spent quiet afternoons surrounded by old pages and familiar memories. But there was a new feeling beneath everything. I found myself looking forward to the sound of the front door opening. I found myself smiling when I saw Chloe walk in with her camera bag and that calm expression she always carried. The strange part was that Chloe seemed completely unaware of how much she had become part of my life. One afternoon, she arrived at the bookstore with a collection of photographs from her latest project. She placed them on the counter and asked me what I thought. I studied each image carefully. There was a photograph of a small house surrounded by trees, another of an empty street after a summer rain, and another of an elderly couple sitting together outside a local cafe. Every picture felt alive. You have a way of finding stories everywhere, I told her. Chloe smiled. Maybe because I know what it feels like when people do not notice you. Her answer surprised me. I looked at her, waiting for her to explain, but she quickly changed the subject. That was Chloe. She would open a door for a moment, then gently close it again. I did not push because I understood. Some memories needed time before they could be shared. A few days later, Chloe invited me to visit a small photography workshop where she was speaking about her work. I was nervous at first. I had spent so much time avoiding new experiences that being surrounded by creative people felt unfamiliar. But Chloe stayed close throughout the event, introducing me to others and making sure I felt comfortable. At one point, someone asked how we knew each other. Before I could answer, Chloe smiled and said, "Emily is the reason I started seeing certain stories differently." I was surprised by her words. Later, when we were walking back to the car, I asked what she meant. Chloe looked thoughtful. "Your bookstore reminded me that everything has a history. People, places, even moments." I smiled. "That sounds like something a photographer would say." She laughed softly. "Maybe. But I learned it from you." That simple sentence meant more than she probably realized. I had spent years believing that I was invisible, that my quiet life meant I was no longer important. But Chloe saw things in me that I had forgotten were there. She saw patience. She saw creativity. She saw someone who still had dreams. That evening, I found myself standing in the bookstore after closing, looking around at the shelves and the small details I had created over the years. For the first time, I did not see a place where I had hidden from the world. I saw a place where I had built something meaningful. And Chloe had helped me recognize that. Still, a small question remained in my mind. If Chloe cared this much, why did she keep everyone at a distance? What had happened that made her believe caring from afar was safer than letting someone truly know her? I knew I wanted the answer. But more importantly, I knew I wanted Chloe to feel safe enough to tell me. The answer to my questions about Chloe came sooner than I expected. I had spent weeks wondering what was hidden behind her quiet personality, why someone who showed so much kindness seemed afraid to accept it in return. I never wanted to force her to share something she was not ready to talk about. But sometimes people reveal the truth when they finally feel safe enough to stop protecting themselves. It happened one evening after we closed the bookstore. Rain tapped softly against the windows, and the warm lights inside made the empty store feel like a small world separate from everything outside. Chloe was sitting near the front counter, looking through some old photographs she had taken years earlier. I noticed her expression change as she looked at one particular image. That one means a lot to you, I said. Chloe looked down at the photograph and nodded.
Yes.
It was one of the last pictures I took with someone important to me. I stayed quiet, letting her decide how much she wanted to share. After a moment, Chloe told me about the person who had inspired her love for photography. She explained how that relationship had changed the way she saw the world, but also how losing that connection had made her afraid of getting too close to people again. I thought if I never cared too much, I could never feel that kind of pain again, she said. Her voice was calm, but I could hear how much that belief had shaped her life. I understood because I had created my own version of the same protection. I avoided new relationships because I was afraid of disappointment. Chloe avoided deep connections because she was afraid of loss. We were different, but somehow we had both been hiding from the same thing. Do you think it worked? I asked gently. Chloe looked confused. What? Keeping people away. She looked at the photograph again and smiled sadly. I thought it did. And now? I asked. Chloe took a deep breath. Now I think I might have protected myself from happiness too. That moment changed the way I saw her. Chloe was never cold. She was never careless. She was simply someone who had learned to survive by keeping parts of herself hidden. And suddenly, all those moments I had questioned made sense.
The coffee.
The small gifts. The way she always noticed when I needed help. Chloe had been showing care all along. She just did not know how to say it. After that conversation, something between us became easier. We did not suddenly become different people. We still had our fears. We still had questions we could not answer. But there was a new honesty between us. Chloe started sharing more about her dreams, and I started sharing more about mine. We talked about places we wanted to visit, books we wanted to read, and the kind of lives we hoped to create. I realized that the person I once believed did not care was actually someone who cared so deeply that she was afraid of showing it. And maybe that was the thing we both needed to learn. Love was not about finding someone without fears. It was about finding someone who made you brave enough to face them. After Chloe finally opened up about her past, I noticed a change in the way we spent time together. It was not something dramatic or obvious. There were no sudden promises or big declarations. Instead, there was a quiet comfort between us that had not existed before. Chloe no longer seemed like someone standing behind a wall. She still had moments when she became quiet, but now I understood that her silence was not a lack of feeling. It was simply the way she processed the world around her. And for the first time, I felt like she was allowing me to see the person beneath that silence. One afternoon, Chloe asked me to join her while she photographed a small town about an hour away from the bookstore. She said she wanted to capture places that were often ignored by travelers. I smiled because that sounded exactly like her. She had always been drawn to things other people overlooked. The drive there was peaceful. We talked about music, books, and the small dreams we had never shared with anyone else. When we arrived, Chloe walked through the streets with her camera, stopping every few minutes to capture something that caught her attention. A flower growing beside an old building. A handwritten sign outside a family-owned shop. Sunlight reflecting on a quiet road. Watching her work helped me understand her even more. Chloe did not just take pictures. She preserved moments that might otherwise disappear. At one point, she handed me the camera and asked me to look through the viewfinder. I laughed immediately. I do not know what I am doing. Chloe smiled. Neither did I when I started. I looked at the scene in front of me and pressed the button. When I showed her the photograph, she smiled. You see more than you think you do. Her words stayed with me because I realized she was not only talking about photography. She was talking about the way I saw myself. For years, I had believed my life had become smaller after my divorce. I thought I had lost the ability to discover new things about myself. But Chloe kept reminding me that there were still parts of me waiting to be found. Later that evening, we sat at a small cafe before driving home. Chloe asked me if I had ever considered creating something completely new instead of only preserving other people's work. I thought about it. Maybe I have. Been afraid to try. She looked at me and smiled. You are always telling me that old books deserve another chance. Maybe people deserve the same thing. I laughed softly, because she was right. Chloe had a way of turning my own words back toward me. That night, when we returned to the bookstore, I realized something had changed. Chloe was no longer just someone who visited my life. She had become someone I wanted to share my life with. But with that realization came another question. Could two people who had spent years protecting themselves truly allow something new to grow? I did not know the answer yet. But for the first time in a long time, I was willing to find out. The closer Chloe and I became, the more I realized that some of the biggest changes in life happened quietly. There was no single moment when everything shifted between us. Instead, it happened through countless small moments that slowly became impossible to ignore. The way Chloe would send me a message after a long day at the bookstore just to ask how I was doing. The way she remembered stories I had mentioned weeks earlier. The way she would look at old books and somehow make me see them differently. She had become part of my everyday life, and that realization both comforted and scared me. I had spent years believing that depending on someone was dangerous. After my divorce, I had convinced myself that independence meant never needing anyone again. But Chloe was showing me that there was a difference between needing someone to complete you and choosing someone who makes your life richer. One afternoon, Chloe came into the bookstore carrying a folder filled with photographs. She looked more excited than usual, and I immediately noticed. Something happened, I said. She smiled. Maybe. I laughed. That is not an answer. Chloe sat down near the front window and explained that she had been offered an opportunity to work on a major photography project. It was the kind of opportunity she had dreamed about for years. She would travel to different places, capture stories through her camera, and spend several months away from home. I should have been surprised by my own reaction. My first feeling was happiness for her. I knew how much this meant. I knew Chloe deserved every opportunity that came her way. But underneath that happiness was another feeling I did not want to admit.
Fear.
The thought of Chloe leaving made me realize how much space she had taken in my life. I had become used to sharing my days with her. I had become used to knowing she would walk through the bookstore door. That is amazing, I told her. Chloe smiled, but she noticed something in my expression. You are happy for me, but you are also worried. I looked away because she was right. I do not want you to think I am asking you to stay, I said. I would never want to be the reason you turn down something important. Chloe was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Emily, that is exactly why I trust you. Her words surprised me.
Why?
I asked. She smiled gently. Because you care about my dreams even when they make things harder for you. I thought about that. Chloe had spent so much time believing that caring meant risking pain. Now I was learning the same lesson from a different direction. Caring meant allowing someone to become important while accepting that life could change. That evening, we walked through the streets near the bookstore, talking about the future. We did not make unrealistic promises. We did not pretend distance would be easy. We simply admitted that something meaningful had grown between us. And for the first time, I understood that love was not about holding on to someone so tightly that they could never leave. It was about giving someone the freedom to become who they were meant to be and trusting that what mattered would find a way to remain. The weeks before Chloe left were filled with moments I wanted to remember forever. I knew that time was moving forward, and soon the bookstore would feel different without her walking through the door. But instead of letting fear take over, I tried to focus on the time we still had together. Chloe and I continued sharing simple moments that somehow became the most meaningful ones. We organized books, explored small cafes around town, and spent evenings talking about dreams we had never shared with anyone else.
I
realized that I was no longer waiting for my old life to return. I was building a new one. One afternoon, Chloe helped me rearrange the bookstore. She moved a few shelves near the window to create a small reading area where customers could sit and enjoy a book. I looked at the space and smiled. You are leaving your mark here. Chloe laughed softly. Maybe you just needed someone to remind you that this place could change. I looked around and realized she was right. For years, I had kept everything exactly the same because change felt uncomfortable. But Chloe showed me that change could also create something beautiful. A few days later, we sat together outside the bookstore after closing. The evening air was cool, and the street was quiet. Chloe looked thoughtful. I am scared, she admitted. I was surprised because Chloe always seemed so confident. About the project? I asked. She nodded. Yes. Everyone thinks leaving is easy when it is something you want. But sometimes following your dreams means walking away from something that matters. I understood exactly what she meant. For so long, I thought I was the only one afraid. I thought Chloe had everything figured out because she was brave enough to chase new experiences. But she had fears too. She just carried them differently. You know what I think? I said. What? I think being afraid means something matters. Chloe smiled at that. That sounds like something I would say. I laughed. Maybe I learned it from you. That night, we talked honestly about what would happen when she left. We promised to stay connected, but we also promised something more important. We promised not to stop growing. I did not want Chloe to come back as the same person. I wanted her to experience everything she was meant to experience. And I wanted the same for myself. The day before her departure, Chloe came into the bookstore with a small gift. It was a notebook with a simple cover. For your new stories, she said. I smiled. I am not a writer. Chloe looked at the shelves around us. Everyone creates stories. Some people just use different tools. I held the notebook and felt a wave of emotion. Chloe had entered my life when I believed my story was almost finished. She reminded me that there were still chapters one had never written. When she left that evening, I watched her walk toward her car. I expected to feel only sadness, but instead I felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Because Chloe had already changed my life in ways I could never have imagined. And even though I did not know what the future would bring, I knew one thing. The woman I once misunderstood had become the person who taught me how to hope again. The first few weeks without Chloe were harder than I expected, but not in the way I had imagined. I thought the hardest part would be missing her presence in the bookstore. I thought I would feel lost without our conversations, our routines, and the quiet moments we shared. And I did miss those things. But what surprised me most was how much Chloe had changed the way I looked at my own life. Before she left, I believed my world was becoming smaller. Now I realized I had simply stopped looking for new possibilities. The bookstore felt different after Chloe's departure, but it did not feel empty. The reading corner she helped create became one of the most popular places in the store. Customers would sit there for hours, sharing recommendations and stories with each other. Every time I saw someone enjoying that space, I thought about Chloe and the way she always noticed potential in things others overlooked. I started using the notebook she gave me. At first, I did not know what to write. I was not used to recording my own thoughts or dreams. But slowly, I began filling the pages with ideas. New events for the bookstore. Places I wanted to visit. Creative projects I had always postponed because I thought there was no reason to start something new. Chloe had encouraged me to see my life differently, and I wanted to honor that by continuing to grow. We stayed in touch while she traveled. She sent me photographs from different places and told me stories about the people she met. I loved seeing the world through her eyes. But something else happened too. I noticed Chloe was changing. The woman who once avoided talking about her feelings started sharing more. She told me when. She was excited. She admitted when she felt uncertain. She allowed herself to be seen. One evening, we had a video call after I closed the bookstore. Chloe showed me photographs from a small town she had recently visited. I think I finally understand something, she said. I smiled. What? She looked at the images on her screen. For years, I thought caring about someone meant giving them the power to hurt me. But now I think caring about someone means allowing yourself to experience something meaningful. Her words stayed with me because I knew exactly what she meant. We had both spent years protecting ourselves in different ways. Chloe built distance. I built routine. We both believed safety meant avoiding uncertainty. But maybe uncertainty was not always something to fear. Maybe it was where the most important moments began. As the months passed, I continued building the life I had almost forgotten I wanted. I started hosting small community events at the bookstore. I created displays featuring stories about change and second chances. People began telling me that the bookstore felt different. warmer, more alive. I smiled whenever I heard that because I knew why. Chloe had not just entered my life. She had reminded me that I was capable of creating something new. Still, there was one question I could not ignore. When Chloe finally came home, would we still be the same two people who had said goodbye? Or would we discover that distance had changed us more than we expected? I did not know the answer, but for the first time, I was not afraid of finding out. When Chloe finally told me she was coming back, I realized how much I had changed since the day she left. Months earlier, I had been afraid of what distance would do to us. I worried that time apart would create a space between us that we could never cross. But as I looked back, I understood something important. Distance had not taken away what we built. Instead, it had given both of us the chance to become stronger versions of ourselves. The morning Chloe returned, I opened the bookstore earlier than usual. I told myself I was simply preparing for the day, but the truth was that I was nervous. I wondered if she would feel like the same person who had walked into my bookstore months before. I wondered if I would feel like the same person too. When the door finally opened, I looked up and saw Chloe standing there with her camera bag and a familiar smile. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she laughed softly. "You changed the bookstore." I smiled. "You noticed?" Chloe looked around at the new displays, the reading corner, and the artwork I had added to the walls. Of course I noticed. Those simple words reminded me of the person she had always been. Someone who paid attention. Someone who saw details other people missed. We spent the afternoon catching up. Chloe told me about her journey, the places she visited, and the stories she captured through her photographs. I told her about the changes at the bookstore and the new ideas I had created. As we talked, I realized something that surprised me. We were not trying to return to the way things were before. We were sharing who we had become. That felt different. It felt healthier. Later that evening, we walked through the quiet streets near the bookstore. Chloe stopped near the window of a small cafe and looked at me. "I thought about this moment a lot while I was away," she said. I smiled. "Really?" She nodded. I wondered if I would come back and find that everything had changed. I looked at her carefully. And Chloe smiled. "Everything did change. But I think that is a good thing." Her answer stayed with me, because she was right. We had both changed. Chloe was no longer the woman who believed distance was the only way to protect herself. I was no longer the woman who believed a quiet life was the only safe life. We had both discovered that growth did not mean leaving people behind. Sometimes it meant becoming someone who could love more honestly. Before we said goodbye that night, Chloe handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photograph she had taken during her journey. It was a picture of an old bookstore surrounded by flowers. On the back, she had written a simple message. "Some places become special because of the people who make you feel at home." I looked at Chloe and smiled because I finally understood something I had been searching for since the day she arrived. She had never been someone who did not care. She had simply been someone who cared so deeply that she was afraid to show it. And now, standing beside her again, I knew we were ready for whatever came next. Looking back at everything that happened, I realized the greatest change in my life was not meeting Chloe. It was discovering who I became because I met her. Before Chloe walked into my bookstore, I thought my story had already been written. I believed that after disappointment, the safest choice was to stop expecting anything new. I built a comfortable life around routines, familiar places, and the idea that needing someone was a risk I did not want to take. But Chloe showed me something I had forgotten. A person can be strong and still allow someone else to matter. The bookstore continued to grow, and so did I. The small reading corner Chloe helped create became a place where people gathered to share stories, recommendations, and conversations. Every time I saw someone sitting there with a book in their hands, I remembered the woman who first walked through my door carrying a camera and a quiet heart. Chloe and I continued building our relationship one day at a time. We did not pretend that life would always be simple. We both had dreams, responsibilities, and fears. But we learned that caring about someone did not mean losing yourself. It meant having someone beside you who encouraged you to become more of who you already were. One evening, Chloe and I sat outside the bookstore watching the sunset. The street was calm, and the golden light reflected through the windows behind us. She looked at the store and smiled. "Do you remember when I first came here?" I laughed. "I remember thinking you were the most difficult person to understand." Chloe smiled. "I probably was. I thought you did not care about anything," I admitted. She looked at me with a gentle expression. I cared too much. I just did not know what to do with it. Her honesty reminded me of how far we had both come. Chloe was no longer hiding behind silence. I was no longer hiding behind a life that felt safe, but incomplete. We had both learned that opening your heart was not about guaranteeing that nothing would hurt. It was about accepting that meaningful things were worth the uncertainty. I looked at Chloe and realized that the person I once misunderstood had become the person who understood me better than anyone else. She saw my fears without judging them. She saw my dreams before I was brave enough to admit them. She reminded me that every person has chapters they have not written yet. Years earlier, I thought my life was becoming smaller. I thought I had already experienced the moments that mattered most. But Chloe taught me that new beginnings do not always arrive loudly. Sometimes they arrive quietly, through a conversation in a bookstore, a shared photograph, or a person who notices the things everyone else ignores. And maybe that was the most beautiful lesson of all. The people who seem hardest to understand are sometimes the ones carrying the deepest stories. Chloe never needed to become someone else to be worthy of love. She only needed someone willing to see the person she already was. And I was grateful that somehow, in the middle of ordinary days and unexpected moments, we found each other.